the Stick Dulcimer. First of all, you print out the mould plans. You print them out 100% and check that it's printed out to scale. Otherwise, you may have to take the plans to a copy shop and get them to enlarge it or shrink it for you. So basically, you print these out, then you collate them by putting the two sheets up to the light and making sure that they match. And then you can sellotape or you can glue them together. Once you've done that, then you can stick this onto a piece of wood. Then here I've used two pieces of 12mm MDF. These have been screwed together temporarily. And then I bandsawed the shape out. I've sanded down a little bit just where it needed to be, but it doesn't have to be perfect. It just because when you put the sides in, it will follow the curve. If you're slightly off here or there, it's not too bad. Okay, so you've got your two pieces of wood together. Now these two pieces of wood are double-sided taped together at the moment. They're not actually physically glued. The backing board is another piece of 12mm MDF. This screws on here. To make it easier to use, what I like to do is to drill these holes out to 20mm and insert a piece of dowel. The idea is that when you insert the net into this piece here, the dowels will keep the whole mould in place and it will stop it from stretching or splitting. Another thing we're going to do as well will be to, once we've done the holes for the dowels and we've got the dowels in, we're going to lay out the soundboard and where the bar is going to be, and we're going to drill a hole which is the same size as the sound hole in the middle here, using the plans to help us. Okay, so I've drilled a hole 20mm all the way through. I'm just sanding down the dowel so that it doesn't stick. It's very important that you can separate them if you need to. Okay, just to make them turn a little bit easier, if you take some very dry soap, apply it, this will help to lubricate the wood inside the MDF. When it comes to take it out, make it a lot easier. Okay, and you just do the others in the same way. Okay, now to finish the mould, what we need to do is to go back to our original drawings, and we need to mark on where the braces were going to be, where the blocks are going to be, and so we can work out where our sound hole is. Okay, now that we've drilled our hole, our 28mm hole, we're going to make the insert for it. Sawdust before worked very well, but I found I had to use the mould twice to get the right size because they would shrink a bit. And ideally you would use sawdust and epoxy resin to make a perfect fit. Alternatively, and this is probably the option I'm going to go for in future, is just to cut out a simple cross piece, cut to the same size, and this should hold. One thing you must do with the insert is to use some sort of screw to attach it. You don't want this going loose inside the instrument. So once you have it in position, I would suggest you drill a small hole and then screw it either from underneath or from in front, so that it's secure. And then all you need to do is to wax it a little bit so that it can grip without sticking. Okay, now our wooden spacer is dry. We can now varnish the bottom plate. We do this because when we glue the sides to the linings and when we glue and to the end blocks, we don't want it to stick to this bottom board. We want to be able to remove this bottom board and access it when we want to. So we're going to use shellac. I've just got some old shellac here. I think this was stained brown, but any shellac would do. You could use wax. It's just to stop the glue from sticking to the MDF. So I'm just and that's it, that's the mould complete. The advancement that's been made is the modification of the mould. by adding some clamps, turning the mould into a clamp. This is thanks to Pete Howlett. What we do is we use these Allen key inserts. And the one I'm using is it's an M6 nut insert, and I got this from Screwfix in the UK. But you can get them in the States, you can get them all over the world. There might be slightly different sizes, so you need to just make sure you've got the right Allen key and the right nut for it, bolt for it, sorry. So basically we drill these into the mould all the way along, and then we make sure that when our soundboard and ribs are all in, we've clamped all these three pieces together. To do that, I'm going to insert a couple of bolts through there, I think, with some nuts. So once we've drilled all these through, the holes for these, then we screw these in using the Allen key. And then we should be able to, when our ribs are in, we should be able to use this very simple, it's just a piece of wood. This is a 1-inch one, but I might use slightly longer ones next time. These just screw in, and you use the Allen key to tighten them up, and it means you don't have to have separate spool clamps that you have in violin making, and it means you can actually glue up the back and the front in one piece. In addition to all the extra features we have on this mould now, what I need to make sure is that the central part that comes off needs to be in two halves. This is so that you can get the instrument out again once it's glued up. So you can either leave it loose, and it's held in place by the wooden pegs still, so it still works as one piece when you're gluing up and when you're doing everything. Alternatively, you can make a small hinge so that these two pieces can be hinged or screwed together. There's several different ways you can do that. You could have some sort of rod connector between them, or you could make it so that this is squarer so you can clamp it. It's up to you how you do that, but just a quick update so that you know to make this in two halves. Or you can modify your existing mould. The initial wood you'll need for making the body. This is spruce soundboard. We've got cherry sides here. These will be sanded or planed down to about 1.5 millimeters. And we have matching set of cherry back and some willow linings. These are about 2.5 to 3 millimeters, about 3 millimeters wide, I think, and by about 8 millimeters depth. Hello, today we're going to be looking at some simple ways of bending some sides. We have our prepared timber, which is 42 centimeters long, 16.5 inches, just over an inch wide, about 26 millimeters, and the thickness, we're looking at about 1.5 millimeters, which is a little bit thinner than we would normally use for a guitar. But since we're building such a small, light instrument, that it's preferable to have between 1.2 and 1.6, I would say, depending on the timber. Okay, so we have our former, which has the half side of the ribs, and we have two of those, one for the left and one for the right. And the jar we're going to be using today is an old juice jar, but the most important thing is the top. It needs to have an opening. It needs to have an opening just over an inch so you can get the pieces of wood in. Okay, so we fill our kettle, and we can get some aluminium foil ready. Okay, what we need to do is to make sure that no steam escapes, so the steam stays within the bottle. This bottle is about 9-10 inches tall. Okay, so that's ready now. We can take that off and we'll just wait for our water to boil. Okay, so now the water's boiling, we have to work quickly. We pour the water in, taking care, this is very hot. Up to the top, let's try and go. Okay, you need just a little bit at the top. this around. And seal this in. Okay, we're just going to leave this to sweat now for, we'll give it 10 minutes. Okay, it's nearly time. Okay, we'll just check we've got our clamp, clamp ready. Okay. You notice the water's turned slightly orange, and that's the staining from the gum that's in the cherry wood. Different woods will have different colours. This is one of the disadvantages of the method. If you have a very highly coloured piece, that you can lose some of the colour from steaming this way. Okay. Be very careful. The water's still very, very hot under there. Okay, we'll do one at a time. Okay. This one down. Okay, I'm going to hold that in place while I do the other one. The next one. You do have to be quick. You can reheat the wood if you have to. The idea is not to have to. Okay. In theory, I should be able to put them together and then clamp them with one clamp. Okay. Show you in the end, I decided to clamp it this way as well, so that the tail part here was held securely enough. That should be it now. We'll just need a couple more days to let the wood dry out properly. This is a disadvantage, we have to allow it to dry. Once it's dry, then we can start to put it in the mould and glue the blocks in. Well, it's been a week now, and the ribs are now dry, they've set in their shape. We can now cut them to size and glue the blocks and linings on. This jig is the same size that I need the ribs to be, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just chop off the excess here and the excess here. Okay, before we glue our ribs in, we need to check we've got our spacer. We've shaped our end block. The end block has been shaped on a disc sander. You can see it's got a slight curve at the bottom which matches the mould. I've drawn the centre line in so I can match up the centre line on the mould. Okay, so we take out our ribs. Now there's a bit of spring back, but not too much. Okay, I'm going to just hold this in place with a stick for now. Okay, so we're just going to apply adhesive. I'm just using my finger applicator this time. What I may do is put a little bit more on. And just put a little bit extra on here as well. Okay. Should be good. Put that in position. Oh, we're going to get to our clamp. We're going to remove one layer of mould, and so that does it. Just one. Okay. So taking the dowels as well. Okay. So that we can get our clamps around on the linings. Okay, this is the lining. It's slightly oversized. So what we're going to do, we're going to take our saw and just gradually. Okay, I'm just going to go for a dry fit first of all. And again, on this side over here, and this side here, the same again. We're just going to. Now the linings at this side are only going to be roughly cut to size. We'll cut them to size properly when we glue the stick in place. Okay. Right. This one. And the next one, same again. Okay, so we apply tight bond again to the we need to apply a little bit at the end here where it also touches the end block. These are just regular clothes pegs. Okay, that's one side. Now that the linings are glued and dried, we'll take these off. Okay, and we replace back the mould. Okay. Now we want to glue the linings on the other side, so what we do, take our knife and we remove very carefully the bottom piece. Okay. Okay, now we're going to repeat the process. Do the soundboard. Take a scrap piece of plywood, low tack double-sided adhesive. Now you want to line up the center line of the sound hole with that piece of wood. Okay. Okay, now we're going to clamp this to our bench drill, and we're going to drill out the rosette first using this 32mm Forstner bit, and then we'll follow that with the 28mm bit which we used to make the mould sound hole here. Okay, here we have the recess. So it's just over 1 millimetre in depth, and at the moment the soundboard is about 3mm thick, so that's got to come down at least another millimetre. So once we've installed the rosette, then we'll plane down the soundboard as well. We need to take our purfling and bend it into a 35mm circle. We still need a little bit of heat to do that. To do that, we just pour some boiling water into a small container. We have our purfling mould here, which is the same size, the same 35mm diameter as the purfling ring. What we're going to do now is take a single piece of this, and you can see now it's become a little bit more flexible. So we place it in the mould. Okay, you can see I've cut it quite oversize. At this stage we're just trying to see if it fits. It fits fine. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mitre the joint. So I'm going to take my scalpel, I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle here. You can see that. Put it back in the mould. Bend our inlay around. Now what we want to try and do is to eye up where the mitre is going to be. So I'm going to cut it oversize at first. I can see that it needs to go. I can probably do this, but so first I'll cut it oversize. Push that in. Now you can see that it's just very fractionally oversized. All I have to do is take off a very tiny amount. This is a lot easier with the fibre bindings. I found that with the with wood this is a little bit more tricky to cut, especially when wet. It softens it up just a little bit too much. Okay. Try again, put it in first. Okay. I think it's nearly that. Okay, that's one ring done. Now the second ring has to fit in the middle of inside this one. So again, I think I've done too much here. So again, we start bending it, just gradually manipulating it. Okay. That's our ring. Okay. We are going to leave this to dry. What I sometimes do, sometimes I overcoat this. When it's dry, I put a little bit of super glue on to hold it together. But we don't want to stick the rosette into this piece of scrap wood, but just a tiny drop in the middle. Okay, to install our ring, we saturate the inside with wood glue. Okay, we take our ring very carefully. I'm actually going to not glue this one, so this is completely unglued, so it's going to come apart. If you have super glue, you can pre-glue it like I suggested. I didn't have any super glue on me at this time, but it's not so bad. I'm going to just make sure there's some extra glue on the inside of this one. There's already glue on the outside of there. So we insert our first ring. We make sure the join is at the top of the first one. It just it doesn't cut in. Sometimes it cuts into the wood otherwise. Okay, so that's the first one. Good. Okay, the second one, there was plenty of glue in that. So we're going to use that to glue this. We'll make the second join at the bottom, so it's the opposite side. So make sure that one goes in first. And then we bend that in, and it should push into place. It shouldn't need anything to hold it really. I think that's pretty much it. Okay, before we can fit the braces, we're going to be sanding down our tops. Now, at the moment they're around about 3mm, I'd say. First of all, we have to sand down this piece of inlay. It has to be level with the rest of the soundboard. Once we've sanded this down, we can then thickness the whole piece. Now, there are several ways of doing this. You can, if you haven't got any equipment, just use a sanding block, a large sanding block, and take your time. And you can just do that just with a sanding block, but it will take, you need to sand down about 1mm, which is, a good couple of hours work probably if you're doing it by hand. Alternatively, you can use a hand plane and plane it down very carefully, and then fine sand towards the end. Or if you have some sort of way to thickness it, I use a thickness sander, which I'm just going to show you now. Now, to make the struts on our instrument, we need to use pine or spruce. You can just use materials from a hardware shop, but you need to pay close attention to the grain. As you can see on this piece, if you look carefully, the grain is going at an angle almost like 45 degrees, like this way. This piece is only just about acceptable. The ideal you're really looking for is for the grain to be upright, so that you make the brace stiffer. But because of the instrument that we're making, it's not so vital. If you were doing a guitar, you have to pay more attention to these sort of things because it really matters. Okay, so we have 2 lots of timber here that we can use. And again, this we can cut this in half. Okay, so this will be fine. We're looking around about 4mm thick for our soundboard braces, and probably less than about 10mm high at the most, depending on the flexibility of the top. What we're going to do is use the plain side, which is already smooth, as our datum. That's going to be the surface that is glued to the soundboard. This is the rough top is going to be the top of the brace. So we can either sand down these braces, cut them to size and sand them down, or we can plane them, put them in a small jig and plane them. Okay, remembering now that the flat surface, the original plain surface of the wood, is going to be the surface that's glued to the soundboard, we're now going to shape the braces in with the sanding disc very simply. And then we're going to tape the other end. Okay, and to finish off, we're just going to do the ends. Okay, what you can see here is slightly wider at this end and narrower at this end. And what we're going to do now is use sandpaper to round over this edge. Before we glue on our struts, we need to make sure that the soundboard is smooth all over. We're going to use 180 grit and then follow that with a 240 to make sure the inside is nice and smooth. And then we'll just wipe off any dust that remains on the soundboard. The last thing I like to do is to take the brace and just to whittle the end of it. Now to clip this on, so we've laid out the braces in an A pattern that we're going to use, and we're just going to do them one at a time. Using tight bond adhesive. box one. Okay. To clean up the glue that was squeezed out, we can use a chisel and just scrape it along. Okay, and anything else we can use a slightly damp cloth to wipe up the rest. Okay, this is it after half an hour of drying. The next stage will be to prepare the stick. The piece of wood I've chosen to use is American cherry. I've planed it to just under an inch. And the fingerboard material is going to be Power Rosa, which I bought from a wood turning place about 20 years ago, and I cut up into 4mm pieces. To trim off the excess fingerboard, we will use the neck blank as a mould, and then use our pen to mark along here. We will then saw off the wastage. I've attached double-sided tape to the fingerboards. I'm now going to stick them to the neck blank, and we're going to put them through the thicknesser together so that both the fingerboard and the neck are the same width. There is a disadvantage to this. Sometimes some rosewoods and some fingerboard materials are quite brittle and they can splinter, so you need to have a look. I know that this material should be fine for the thicknesser. It's straight grain, it's quite fine textured, and it should go through. Okay, so we've just attached these fingerboards with double-sided tape to this blank here. And now we're going to put them through our thicknesser, which is a Mafal AD160, which thickness is up to 6 inch wide and 4 inches thick. Okay, and now we have the fingerboard flush with the neck. All we have to do is take off the fingerboards. There we are. Okay, so we have our neck blank, and what we need to do now is to mark on the positions of the headpiece and where the sides join the neck. To do this, we just take our set square. Okay, so we measure, use the drawings as a guide. That's the head. Okay, so in this example, the head I've marked position 11 centimeters from the end, and then I've measured the length of the fingerboard to the point where it joins the sides. In this example, it's going to be about 383 millimeters. And then finally we mark on to the end, which is 454. Okay, and all we do now is put our square along here. Just mark on in pencil for now these positions. Okay, so if we butt up the head to the drawing, we can see that we've got to make this into a, to go back. On the plans I show the design of a fender type head, which is made of one piece of wood with a piece cut out. I also show the one that I prefer to use now, which is a slanted back headstock, or about 14 degrees I think. Now we can probably use the excess that's already here. If we have some extra length, we can cut that and glue it on, and then cut out this shape with a bandsaw, or we can slice off a triangle off the end here, and then glue that onto the reverse side. Because the neck is so short, strength is not so much of a critical issue as it is with a guitar or a classical guitar. Okay, I'm using this sliding bevel to help draw this line out. So we'll just lay the sliding bevel on. We've adjusted the angle already. You can trace it otherwise. Tracing is another way to do it. Okay. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to glue this piece onto the headset. Clamps. Nice. What I'm going to do now is to glue on the head plate. This is like about 1.2 millimeters. This is rosewood in this example. You could use 2 pieces of veneer, a contrasting veneer, or you could leave as it is. What we're going to do, we're just going to clamp this in place, use some cork to spread the glue over. The hinge, masking tape hinge, should hold it in position. And we just need to clamp that for another half an hour until it's set, and then we can carry on working on the next part. So now with the head plate glued on, we can finish the rest of the neck. What we're going to do is cut the neck to length, and then use the excess we've got to build up the heel. And once we've done that, then we can cut in the groove for the sides and the soundboard itself. So we double check the measurements, and we double check where the neck sides are let in, and the end of the block. This part here is the waist, and we're going to cut this off, and then we're going to reattach it to this part here, so that we can build up this heel block. Okay, so now what we've done, we've marked on the heel. What we need to do is just mark on the positions of the neck, and then lastly we're going to scribe on the 14mm mark on here, and then we're going to cut this with the bandsaw down to size. You can also use a hand saw, or you can use your pillar drill and a Forstner bit to help reduce the wood. Now to mark out the headstock thickness, what we do is we use, this is a marking gauge I have. This is quite good because you can easily reverse it and then the same again. It's hard to see the line here. What I suggest you do is, once you've marked on the line, is just to take a pencil and just to mark it a little bit. Now, one other thing to check is the depth of your ribs, to make sure. Now this says it's 26.27, and then you need to transfer that over to your heel. The next stage is to let in the sides. If you look at the body, you see how we left the body. We've got to make little grooves now for the sides to go into. We don't want these sides to be proud of the neck. We want to inlay. We want to inlay the side. So we measure the thickness of our sides. And then we make a corresponding rebate. And once we've done that, we'll do the same on the other side. How we're going to begin is we're going to take our knife and we're going to actually use the square using where the fingerboard's going to go as our datum, and we're going to lay our set square on here, and what we're going to do is we're going to mark a line with the knife all the way around, the top and the sides. And once we've done that, then we're going to take a saw. This is a tenon saw, but we're going to take or a dovetail saw, make a 2mm saw cut on either side of here. It's easy to make this relief cut now while the wood is still flat and square, before we start taking wood off on each side. Just stop every few saw cuts to see how far it's gone. You see it's deep enough on this side, but on this side we just need to do a tiny bit more. That's good. And the same again on the other side. And lastly, we're going to do the same on the top of the neck. This is to prepare the top for the neck inset that we're going to do last of all. So same again. This one needs to be the same as about 2mm. Fractionally over doesn't really matter because you're going to set the depth by cutting out the wood. There are ways you can cut out the rebates here. You can use your bandsaw, using a fence, take off the same amount on the left hand side, inverting it, and on the right hand side. Saw to cut these rebates, or a table saw to do something similar. What you can do is use the pillar drill. Now, if the pillar drill is set up with a Forstner bit, if you use the maximum stoppage as the depth that you want to drill down to, so you're going to have to measure. Okay, so I've set the maximum stoppage for just about 1.6mm. And I've checked it against this one I've already done. So what we're going to do now, we're going to just drill out the waist. We're not going to remove everything though. And then we're going to invert it and do the same again on the other side. What we've done, see here that you can see its thickness to the right dimensions, but we do have these pieces of wood which we need to chisel off. Or alternatively, we can drill another hole in the middle, but we have to make sure that we leave some supporting areas, otherwise we won't be drilling true. There we go. That's probably the neatest and quickest we could do it. It doesn't matter about these holes, they have no bearing on the actual structural part of the instrument. They'll never ever be seen. I mean, you can fill them in if you really wanted to with a piece of wood, but it's unnecessary to do so. So what we do is we take a chisel and we chisel off these pieces. Okay, so we've got to the stage where we've got we've either done it by cutting away a piece of wood, or we've done it by drilling the holes. Okay, so now what we need to do is to look at the rebate for the soundboard. Now there are some fundamental choices now that need to be made. What we can do at this stage is make a decision whether we're going to make our neck flat along the plane or have a slight angle. All of my stick dulcimers I've made in the past have all had a slight angle, maybe just a couple of degrees. And I do this by setting the neck back slightly, 1/10 of an inch tilted back, and that gives you an extra 2 or 3 millimeters up down here, again, which gives you a little bit more volume, a little bit more power, but you don't want to overdo it. This is a subtle thing that if you want to try it, if you wanted to tilt your neck back, it's this bottom part here that you need to adjust the angle of, because this becomes your datum for the thicknessing of the top part. So if you put a slight back angle in there, which means to take off a bit there, so that the neck is facing that way, tilting backwards, then when you lie this on, then it will still take off an equal amount, but the neck will be at a slight angle. And to mark it on the neck blank, best thing to do is to lay the neck flat on a piece of flat wood, make sure it's flat wood, and then to take the shim, which is like 2 millimeter or so shim, and place it near the nut end. This raises the neck by about 2 millimeters at this end. Now what you need to do is to mark a line that is parallel. Okay, and I'm not using this to make a parallel line. By sanding parallel to this line, when we invert it and place it on the bench drill and drill out the rebate, what we'll find is that it will follow this angle, and we'll have a groove up here which is at a slight angle. So this is the rebate of the soundboard, and this mark here is just extend it over there as well. This is this is going to be the back of the instrument, and we've done that from both sides. Okay, now we'll do the same again as we did. Well, first of all, we're going to sand this down. Actually, we'll use the sander to get this down to this line, and from that position, then we're going to mark on. We're going to cut that out with the bench drill. And again, once you've done that, you again use your chisel. You lie your chisel flat against here, and you just pop out the. I plan to finish off the neck once it's glued to the body, but the last thing I'm going to do is to thickness the headstock. Now if you see the mark I made earlier, that scratch line there, a 40mm mark, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this thicknesser attachment on my bench drill. I'm just going to sand that to size. You can use a sander. The thing about the thicknesser is that it gives you an even thickness all over. Remember to always refer to the marks you've made on both sides. And I bought this as a wood turning blank about 20 years ago. I've cut this up into 4mm slices, and it's been planed, as I showed before, when I made the neck. Normally when I'm making fingerboards I would choose plantation rosewood, which is sort of a light coloured rosewood, or I do have some old ebony that I sometimes use, but there are lots of different timbers that you can choose. So the tools that we're going to use today will be our square. We need some sort of marking knife. I've got a Japanese one, but a standard type of knife will do. The main thing is a knife that you can get right up to the edge with, so a flat side is really useful. So basically a marking knife that's nice and sharp. You need a fine pencil. A digital caliper is very useful, but you can do without it if you have to. And the only other tool that I have mentioned, and that's the saw. I've actually just bought this saw. I've been using a ground down hacksaw blade and for quite some time now, but this is a saw that's sold especially for fret wire, so it's already the right thickness. And this is you can adjust this. Well, the first thing I do is to put some masking tape on the fingerboard. Especially when it's not so bad with a light wood like Paurosa, but some with dark woods like rosewood. You want to see your marks. You want to be able to see what you're doing. This also protects the surface of the fingerboard a little bit. Tiny bit off each end. When laying out the frets, there are a few rules that you need to follow. You must make sure you always measure from the nut end to the fret. You must never measure from fret to fret. What happens if you just measure from, say, the second fret to the third fret, or the third fret to the fourth fret? You gradually get small little inaccuracies, and these inaccuracies build up until you get to the higher end of the fretboard and you start to get notes that are out of tune. So always measure from here, from the end to the fret, and then once you've done that, you need to use the measurement of the fret to check that the frets are in the right places. I'm actually going to mark out 3 fretboards at the same time, just to save time. It takes just as much time for me to mark and cut out this way as to do a single fretboard, so I can save a lot of time by doing 3 at once, and it gives me 2 extra boards to use later. And we first mark with a pencil, very fine pencil. This is 3mm. And then we're going to take our Japanese knife and use it with the flat face against the square so that the line is perfectly square. And this line will serve as a guide for the saw when we do that. Now again, for the second fret, we butt the ruler against the end again, and we're measuring all the way to the second fret, which is 134mm. Okay, we make our mark, then we take our square and we place it against, and we mark it with a pencil. You can see here how I've measured, and then when I double checked it, I've realised it's about half or 1/4mm to the left or to the right. And so I've made a little round circle and I've put the corrected measurements in. As long as I check all this before as I go, I should be fine. I double check everything, and then when I've done it all, I'll recheck with the digital caliper and make sure it's all right. This is the medium size fret wire that I'm using. What you need to do is to measure the depth of the cut. You can either use your depth gauge if you've got a vernier caliper, or you can make it needs to be just slightly, fractionally more, just like a 1/4mm more, just so there's a little bit more depth to the cut. And then if you adjust your saw, if you have a guard on it, then you can adjust your saw if it has one of these guards on it. Otherwise you can improvise, make some sort of stop. Now the knife made a nice beautiful cut. Now what we want to do is insert a chisel into that cut and create a slight V. And no, it's not a great V we're making, it's just widening it just enough so that we can get our curve of our saw blade into it. Okay, having done that, we take our saw blade and we're going to put the very tip of the saw into that groove. Now once we've done that, once the tip is in the groove, we can then butt our square up to the line, and then we can rest our saw blade now and make the final cuts. Now we can break up the fingerboards. Be careful because they're a little bit more fragile now. They've got the saw cuts, even though it's 4 millimeters thick, so it's only halfway through. Still, they're more vulnerable at this stage. Okay, I've sanded this down now to a 320 grit, using these on a hard sanding block. I've made sure that it hasn't gone rounded, it's still stayed flat. Okay, what I do now at this stage, before I do any fretting, is to seal this. Now this time of year, linseed doesn't tend to dry very easily because it's the winter, so what I do is I make a mixture of turpentine and linseed, about 50-50 normally does it, or you can also use white spirit. Now this mix is very easy to apply. You just apply it to the top surface and you're just basically sealing the wood. This saves a lot of time later. Okay, and now you just need to leave that for an hour, and when the oil's soaked in you can wipe it again. And we're just going to give it a couple of coats. We're not actually varnishing the instrument, it's just to seal the wood, and also where we put the frets in, it minimises the amount of work that we need to do. If we leave this to dry. Now one thing I must say, if you're using linseed oil, you need to dispose of these carefully because these can spontaneously ignite if you leave them crunched up in a ball anywhere. So if you're using paper towel like this, you can put it down the toilet, flush it down the toilet, or put it on the compost bin. If you open it out, leave it to dry somewhere outside, put it in the compost bin, that's fine, you can do that as well. Okay, and after a couple of coats, what I do a wet sand with 320 grit, and basically I put a layer of oil on, linseed oil, and then I'm just sanding that in. What I think it does, it will fill any pores in the wood. If you're using a rosewood or some other porous wood, then it will fill the holes, and you're going to be left with some sort of with a very finely polished piece of wood. Another tip before inserting the frets is to take a triangular file and just to relieve the edges of the slots. Just by filing with the pointed part of the triangle down, you're just taking off the very edge, and it means that the fret's going a little bit easier. Okay, I'm just going to cut them all slightly oversized. This is probably the simplest way to do it. I will show another way afterwards, but this is the way. So you just use pliers to cut the piece just slightly oversized. You cut out the 11 pieces. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to tap in the fret wire into each slot, just on one corner, and then I'm going to take it to the press. The frets in by hand, we would start in the same way by tapping the fret end at the end, and then we would level it across. And the benefit of pressing the frets in is that you get all the frets will be evenly pressed in if your arbor press is set up. Now the drill press, use the drill press to press the frets in. Okay, so we've just placed it on top of the fret, and all we do is pull the arm down. Okay, we're going to take advantage now, and while the fretboard is off the neck, and we're going to trim the frets. So we use a pair of pliers and with a flat edge against the fingerboard. We're going to first trim off all the overhang, And once we've trimmed off the overhang, then we're going to file the 45-degree angle against the fret ends. This smooth. One way of doing that is to lay this against some sandpaper that's been clamped to a flat board, and we're just going to rock it at a slight angle. We must take care not to damage the edges over here. If we want, we can apply some tape over the wood. This just protects the off chance of us knocking that. This protects the wood on either side of the fret. We hold the file at a 45-degree angle. Okay, now we have the edges sand roughly flush. Now we focus on getting the angle, the 45-degree chamfer. The back for the stick dulcimer, we can either select a single piece of timber. For example, this is a piece of flamed maple that came from a guitar back that I've cut out. And this is one piece of wood. Or we can join two pieces of wood. In this example, I've taken a piece of cherry and I've cut it into half. And now we have a book matched piece of cherry. And I'm just combining two pieces of plywood and a piece of waste cherry, which is going to be the stop. Now this is going to be glued so that it's at right angles to this, just using the square. Once this is glued, then I'm going to use this to plane the two pieces for the back. Okay, so we have our stop here, and we have our board built up, so it's just above the height of the blade here. Again, we tape together the two pieces of cherry. So all we do is we hold it against the stop, and we use... Okay, so we have our two pieces, and what we're going to do now is glue it up with a strip of walnut. This is a piece of walnut, about 2 millimeters thick, that I've cut off from a piece I had. This is going to go in the center and make a... I've just cut it so it's just slightly oversized. We must make sure that the plane surface is going to go down. That's the datum. The front, the board. This is the datum. And we're going to use sellotape to help us glue up. Okay, so what we do, we put 3 pieces of sellotape around the board. Now these are going to. It's just the wrong way around. We're actually, this is with the sticky side outwards, but it needs to tape to itself so that it stays in position. So that's the first one. We'll do 2 more. Okay, so we have 3 pieces of sellotape here, and what we're going to do, we're going to quickly put the glue along this edge. And we're going to hold this in position for the moment. Glue on this edge. Okay, and we're going to hold this in position. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to, this is quite tricky, we hold this at a slight angle with a little V-shaped groove, and we're going to insert the walnut in. This is quite tricky. Now we press. Right. Okay. In theory, the sellotape is pushing the joint together. Now what we're going to do, we're going to put some light cramps along here to hold this in position. What it's useful doing is putting something over. I'm just going to put a piece of tape over this. This is just to stop the wood that I'm going to use sticking to the sellotape. What I'm doing now is using a scraper to just slightly taper the edges of the back. This is the actual back of the instrument, and I'm just going to take it down just 0.5 millimeter or so around the edge. If the back is very flexible, I will put one strut here at the widest point and another strut near the sound hole. But for this example, I think I'm just going to go for a single one diagonally across the bottom. And before I glue the top on, I will also put some reinforcement strips along the top, along this strip here, along with the label. We are now at the stage when we can assemble the neck and the body together. Originally I was going to glue the whole thing in one go by putting the soundboard on, inserting the ribs, inserting the neck, and then applying glue to all these areas and glue them up in one go. But with hindsight, I've been thinking that it would be best to break it down into several stages. It avoids a complete disaster if you make an error in any of those places. So what we're going to do, we're going to make some modification to the original mould. Just take this out 1 minute. So what we're going to do now is actually put a step in the mould here to receive the neck, so that we can glue up the sides and the neck first. It's 34 centimeters, and we'll do the same on the other side. We just need to make sure that this is square. We'll just double check it from the other side as well. So we measure from the end. Okay, I'm just drawing a line with the square here. Okay, so now we have a step at the end of the fingerboard. Now the idea is, when everything is clamped up, the neck recess here can sit flatly on the mould, and the sides will be able to be clamped either side of here, and the soundboard, everything else will be clamped, so everything will be flush to the face of this. Okay, we can put them all back together again. Assembly the mould again, one thing to do is to lightly wax the surfaces where we're going to be gluing. This just helps in case you spill any glue or any seeps out. And if you do the same on the sides of the mould, and before we glue up, what we must do, we must pack out the neck, because this jig is designed for various necks from 27mm down to 22mm. So what you need to do is you need to insert some small pieces of wood veneer, or scrap pieces of the side, or cardboard, or some other material, so that the neck is centered. So you need to do equal amounts on each side, so that when clamped, the neck will be firmly placed in the socket. Now one tip I've got here is, if you pay attention, that all the wood veneer that you put in end at the same point, which is the end of the neck socket. That way, when we clamp up a little bit, all the pressure will be on this part here, so that, because we don't want uneven gluing. We want the whole thing to be firmly glued to the neck, even up to this point here. So if you make sure that if we tape on these pieces with some masking tape, we can do it just by taking our wood veneer and just fixing it so that it's at that point of the neck. And when all the packing pieces are put either side of the neck, to put the neck in will be quite a firm effort, so it will just require, but when it's in, There should be no rocking. It should feel quite stiff, and it should feel flat on the face of where the sandboard will go. And here you can see how the neck lines up with the centre line of the mould right to the tail block here. Okay, so we check the centre line, make sure it matches up, and then to hold it in position we use our Allen key. And again, to hold it, just going to do this as well. So we're holding it against the back of the mould, and we're holding it to the sides of the mould. We just want to make sure that the glue is evenly spread out. So on this side. Okay, that's good to go. Just need to make sure that it's butt up against the thing here. So we have the sides clamped, and we've got a clamp on the front here going to the back. Now we need to leave this for about an hour or two before we have a look at take the clamps off. Okay, now the glue is dried, we can undo the clamps. We'll release it from the mould. We insert this mould in the bottom. This way the wooden pegs have somewhere to go, and it raises the level. But we're just going to gradually level the linings to the sides, and then we'll use sandpaper in the final stages to make sure it's all flat. I'm using some abrasive paper just attached to a maple board that I've got. Now that the back is flat and smooth all the way around here, what we can now do is take our back. We're now going to fit the back to the stick dulcimer. And the way we do that is we make some mark index pins. We're going to drill a small hole in the back, in the dead centre, and up here as well. Now these two location pins are going to help us position the back on the instrument. And the pins I will use are actually made from toothpicks, which are going to cut off the very small end and use a toothpick. Then we mark a corresponding hole on the stick dulcimer. It's also drilled out. Now with the bottom pin in place, we then use that to mark out where the top pin. Now we need to make sure that the walnut stripe is central, and then when we're happy that is so, we can then trim the pins just to slightly bigger. Okay, now we can carefully invert the mould. With the pins in place, we can mark where we need to cut the ribs. Now if we get this right, I'm actually aiming for a flush fit with these. Sometimes I let them in, sometimes I do them just a little bit away from the ribs, but in this case I'm actually just doing them so it would just be a press fit. Okay, now we're going to reassemble the mould. We'll put the sound hole insert in. Okay, we'll take our sound board. Okay, now with the mould clamped in position, we have full access to all the soundboard. We can make sure that it's in the right place. When we're happy that it's in the right place, we can then insert the body back inside. Okay, we have 10 minutes of around about to glue this and to clamp it, so there's no real rush. We just have to do this in a methodical way. Okay, once we've got the glue on, we're just going to make sure that it's spread over all the parts we want it to be spread. The advantage of doing it with the top open is that we have access to the inside of the instrument, which means we can make sure there's no too much glue run out before we start to assemble the thing. Okay. Take some of these off and just get the instrument in. And then it's got it in. Okay. The last thing I'm going to do is put another clamp on the neck, just to make sure that the neck is... Okay, we're going to leave that now for a couple of hours to dry. Once the glue is dried, we can then remove the clamps. Removed half of the clamps so that I can easily insert the back into the groove. This one pin goes in here, and the other pin goes in here. And I can feel the registration. Okay, so when I'm pleased that I've got it, then I'm going to put the glue on and just glue it up. Now, be very careful not to get glue on the inside now, because there's no way we can change any of the glue runs. This is it. One thing we must do is just put a tiny bit of glue just on the ribs there, just to help things along a little bit. Okay. Okay. Okay, we'll just leave this for a couple of hours to dry again, and then we can take off all the clamps. Okay. we go. And we've got quite a lot of overhang still to cut off of this. And there's several ways that we can get rid of this overhang. The simplest way is just to whittle it. Now if you're whittling it, you have to always whittle downhill. So with the soundboard especially, get these going in this direction with the knife. What I do tend to do now is to whittle as much as I can, and then I'm going to take off the rest using a router. To finish the instrument, I'm going to be using a shellac based finish and French polish the instrument by rubbing on the finish using a pad. To measure out the shellac, I'm using I think blonde shellac in this example. Bits in there. Okay. I'm just measuring this by eye. Okay, what we're basically going to do is add about 2 times as much spirit as I'm having to use methylated spirit, but if you're in the United States, you can get Everclear, which is pure alcohol. The problem with this stuff is that it is toxic, really, to your skin. You've got to be very careful, try not to breathe in or use too much of it. Alcohol is a lot safer if you can get it. I can't get it here, so it's just double the amount. So sort of 2-to-1 ratio. Okay, this will take a little while to dissolve properly, and it'll also lose that purple colour as it goes. I would normally leave it overnight. Overnight normally does it, about 12 hours I think. If you keep shaking it every couple of hours, that does seem to help though. Okay, before we route, we're just going to seal the top. All this does is to prevent the router taking chunks out of the wood. It sort of helps make a cleaner cut, make the wood, because spruce is quite a soft wood, there is some tendency for it to chip. And so by putting a bit of shellac sealer on here, this is all going to be sanded off in the end before we put a proper finish on. We can do the same on the cherry, but it's not as vital on the cherry. Now one thing I'm going to do before I route the instrument is I'm going to inlay some pieces of walnut between the neck and the body. The reason I do it now is because when I route around, I want to first smooth this off, and then I'm going to prepare this because I want to put some grooves for bindings as well afterwards. So I'm going to I'm just making a 2mm groove, and I'm going to lay these 2mm pieces of walnut, and then I'll sand that smooth, and then we're ready to begin routing. Okay, that's slightly oversized, but I'll cut it down once that's dried, and then I can turn over and do the other side. Okay, just one more coat of the sealant, and then we'll be ready to route in a minute. I've put some tape around the instrument to build up the areas where I thinned down by half a millimetre or so, just so that when I'm routing, the instrument sits flat on the router table. I'm now going to use a router table to quickly take off the remainder of the wood down to the sides. You can only do this on a router table. If you do this by freehand, you're likely to dig into the instrument, and even so, even this way it still can be hazardous, so you need to take care. Routing, And at this stage, if we want, we can take sandpaper and finish off these edges. And we can just leave the instrument like this. As long as we're happy with everything, we can just sand this flush. Where the routing is slightly missed, we can just sand up with some sandpaper, and that'll be the end. And that'll be finished. But in this case, I'm just going to take it one step further, and I'm going to put an extra rebate in around the edge. And this is going to be for the binding. Now I'm going to try and match up. I've got a walnut strip on the back. I've got some walnut pieces laid on the side. And what I'm going to try and do is have some walnut binding going around the edge. So I'm going to rebate a step using a different bit. Now the bit I'm going to use has a bearing guided cutter, but this time the cutter is just a little bit ahead of that. So instead of routing flush to it, it's going to route a little groove. Now by controlling it using the router table, we can adjust the height of this cut. I think we're probably going to go for about 4 or 5 millimeter depth of the bindings. Once you've changed the router bit to do the binding, what you need to do is do a test cut on a scrap piece of wood. Okay, once you've taken the time and you've gone around several times, you need to have a close look at it and to investigate what I've done. I've just made pencil markings where I've noticed that the routing hasn't gone all the way around to the same depth. So if you just pencil mark around, on this side I've got a bit of rough grain here, so I've actually put a tiny bit of super glue on just to harden the spruce a bit, so it works a little bit better than shellac. So hopefully when I route this will nicely clean up and I'll be able to get a nice smooth line. Otherwise it's looking alright. So I've got one more pass. Okay, so we've got our instrument with all the grooves cleaned up, nice and smooth and ready. What we don't need to do is to make it, we need to cut up here. Now this is the only part which isn't finalised. Now up here we've already got a walnut piece of banding in. Now what we need to do is to tie that up with the linings. Now if I just lay the lining on the groove, this slides up. Now this has got a, I'm not doing anything fancy here. It's just going to be a butt joint over here. But as you see, the router cuts like a rounded shape, so I've got to actually cut that in with a chisel or a knife and make sure that's nice and square. And again on the other side, and again on the top as well, I've got to do the same. So, and also I'm going to square off the back. I'm going to cut from a line from here all the way to the back, and then I'm going to glue on a piece of walnut. Okay, so if we lay our chisel on the line and we take it around to the side and make a little groove for the saw to go on, and do the same on the other side, lay the chisel on. Okay, we're just making a little dent. Now we have the front, and we should have 2 little dents that we should be able to match up. And we do that with a knife first of all. So we mark across. And now we should be able to place our saw very carefully in that groove. Be careful not to go too deep, although okay, I'm reversing the instrument now. Again, we simply lay the chisel on the other end, and we should be able to lever off quite easily. Okay, we're going to glue on a walnut's heel cap. This won't be shaped until after the glue is dried. But before that, we're going to just finish off chiseling the binder. Will go straight up to the end. I'm going to be using my heated bending iron to do my bindings. I'm going to do it in one piece this time, so I'm going to heat in the middle, I'm going to make the curve, and then I'm going to take it around. Okay, once we've got the bottom curve done, then we do the recurve, the facing curve. Now that the bindings have been bent to size, what we need to do now is to trim off the excess here so that the line is fit inside the groove, and then we can glue up. Okay, now that it's all the binding is strapped up, we can leave this for a couple of hours and then we can take it off and have a look. Okay, the glue is dried and now we can remove all the masking tape from the instrument. Okay, so we have the bindings on now. We do need to sand these down flush with the soundboard, but before we do that, what we're going to do, we're going to glue on the walnut cap I mentioned before. We're going to put that on the back, and we're also going to put on we're going to glue some pieces of wood along the sideboard just temporarily. Now what these will do is they will hold, they're going to hold the fingerboard in place when we glue up. So we're just going to just three lots either side, and these just will help when we're clamping. It will help stop the fingerboard from moving off the neck into a different position. We could also use a pin to do that, little pins in the fingerboard, but this way is very simple. We just glue these pieces, just spot glue with a bit of PVA in 3 places so that it can't move. This will just make clamping up the fingerboard so much easier. Okay, now we can just put this into a board, and if we clamp this board down, while it's come down, we can finish sanding the heel. Okay, so before we attach our fingerboard, we do need to sand down the bindings on the top, especially where the neck is going to meet the soundboard. We've rested the fingerboard in its slot. At the moment it's resting proud on the bindings and the soundboard, so we need to sand this down. And I set this neck at a very fractional angle, so we have to sand away just where the fingerboard is going to go. It has to be, we can mark on with a pencil. So if we mark on at this end, we're allowing about 5 millimeters. 5 millimeters for the nuts, so we'll just mark that. And at this end, if we just mark on roughly where the fingerboard's going to go, take that off. Okay, we can see that this is going to have to be sanded down. The best thing to do, well, we need to remove this slide anyway, so what we're going to do, we're going to plane this down very carefully, and when we get to the level of the soundboard, we use sandpaper. Okay, so we've got the neck here. This is the area that we've just planed down, and we've got it so that this follows in a straight plane all the way from here. So this is, you thinned it down probably a millimeter here to each, so it's the same level as the neck. We are going to sand it with a sanding stick just to make sure, but that should be fine. Okay, so we're just going to just make sure it's level. Take our sanding stick. And if we insert the fingerboard into the place, see now that it's perfectly level. Scrapers can also be used on the side of the instrument. The alternative is to route or to sand these flush. I've just taken a piece of normal cork and sanded it. And I can use a strip of, this is cloth backed abrasive, put this around here, and then this follows contour. It takes several hours of scraping and sanding to get down to this level, but it's almost there. You see the binding is flat with the sides now, and I haven't chamfered any edges yet. I'll leave that to that's the very last thing I'll be doing after I've glued on the frame board and after I've shaped the neck. What we can do is pay slightly more attention when we're sanding to this edge around here. This will enable we don't want to touch the middle area at all. We want to leave that the same thickness that we thicknessed that. But if we just sand lightly around here, we're just reducing it by say 0.5 millimeter or so. This helps the soundboard work more effectively. The last thing I like to do is to clamp the fingerboard in position and take a little bit of linseed oil and place it on the soundboard at this point. I do this now because I don't want the glue to stain the soundboard, because Titebond can stain the soundboard and it'll be like a white line. So if I do this now, it will stop the glue line from showing. Okay, now we're ready to glue on the fingerboard. So carefully remove our fingerboard. We check that there's no oil on it. It should have been sanded down before, but just make sure it's completely flat. Just check it over. There's no oil or varnish on it. I've sanded this down already. Okay. Just going to make sure. So we just need to double check at this end that there's the right amount for the nut. We can fit the nut later to fit, but it's best to make sure we've left the right amount of space. Check at this end. When we're happy that it's in the right position, then we can apply the clamps. We're going to gradually take away the corners of this piece of wood and gradually work a semicircle into it. Now there are several ways of doing this. We can use a spoke shave, we can use a file, a very rough wood file can do the job very well too. We can use extremely rough sandpaper and work down into grades. Just whittle it with a knife. Once you go through one rough medium grade, then you can go down to the next grade up. And then finally follow with sandpaper. Now the headstock end, we're trying to curve it so that the round part of the neck will meet a nice smooth transition. So So this part here is the transition. And you can use a guitar or some other instrument. I suggested a violin as the model for the actual shape, but if you have a look at any other instruments that you may have or you may see on the internet, there are many different ways of doing this. Some people carve with a V shape here, some people carve it so it's completely, so it just flows it from the neck into the head. I will show you the way that I do it. Okay, if we just compare the neck as it is to the plans, and what we need to do is to mark on the side profile, just from the heel down to the neck, which is the rounded area. And we're going to move the sort of top a couple of millimeters along the neck. Okay. And if we mark that on here, now the shape of the actual heel, it's going to be a semicircular shape, pretty much like the button on a violin. So it's a semicircular. So there we go. Now the quickest way to do this is to chop this off with a saw, make some saw cuts to start to initialize the shape, and then we will do the rest with the knife and the files, and then use sandpaper to finish. Okay, so it's marked on with a pencil. And we're going to start by this may not make much sense now, but what we're going to do probably chisel those off. Just starting, that's just the initial. The headstock on a stick dulcimer is often very small. It only has to be large enough to hold the tuning pegs. I prefer to use these ones, these closed sealed ones, because they keep their tuning very well, and they're very simple and very easy to use. They're very simple to fit as well. You just need to drill a hole, insert, and then screw on. I would suggest that you get them first. You need to get mini ones. These are, I think, Goto, or I think Wilkinson makes some as well. But they're the mini ones. I think they're sometimes used for Stratocasters or Telecasters. And you get, if you buy a 6 in a line, right-handed, give you 2 sets for the stick dulcimer. But if you get them first, and then before you finalise your shape of your head and everything, you need to make sure that you can fit 3 of them on here before you start taking wood off. You don't want to make it too small to fit the pegs. I've already got a template which I'm going to use as the basis. I do vary it a little bit depending on the instrument I'm making. But I would generally make a template up, and holding that in place, I would then draw around it, and then I would shape it on the bench. I would draw in a template, and then I would shape on the bench sounder. at the stage where I'm going to start to finish the instrument. The first thing we need to do is to go over the whole instrument and just check it over. We're looking for any bits of rough grain, any places where we haven't quite finished sanding. So what I normally do, I go around and I just sort of make little notes on some areas where I feel that there's still work to be done. For example, on the head, around the neck sometimes. It helps to have a good light source. Natural light is quite good. Or something to cast some shadow so you can see if there's any strange textures that need sanding down. Just checking, we want to sort these things out before we put the finish on. Okay, I've clamped the Stick Dulcimer onto a piece of pine board and against the workbench so I can access the heel properly. This enables me to finish the heel. Okay, you can see now how the shape blends around the neck. And the same again at the heel. You can see how this has been blended in. So we've sanded this as smooth as we can, gone over it, we've made sure that the neck is polished and smooth. Now to prepare it for varnishing, what we're going to do is slightly damp the whole instrument all over. Now we're not going to wet it. If we take a sponge, we have to wring out the sponge completely so there's no water in it. Absolutely, so all the water's wrung out of it. So it's just very, very tiny bit damp. Now that we do, we just wipe over the instrument very lightly. All this does is to raise the grain. It also shows up any inaccuracies that you might have missed or anywhere you might have missed. It gives you an idea of the colour it will look when it's varnished as well. So we just wipe this over. Now this doesn't take long to dry, this takes like a minute or so to soak in, and all it does is raise the grain. That's it. Okay, we'll just leave it for a few minutes and then we're just going to fine sand again, probably using the 300 and the 400 grit papers. So I'm using 400 grit paper here. So we're just going to wipe it down and remove any dust that remains on the instrument. You can see quite a bit of dust is coming off. And once we remove the dust, what we're going to do is apply a coat of oil. This is a mixture of linseed oil 50% and white spirit 50%, so it just diluted the oil a little bit. And we're just going to use this to bring out the colour of the cherry wood and the spruce. This dries quite quickly because it's spirit, it will evaporate. We're just going to put one coat on. What you might like to do is use a separate piece of tissue paper to do the soundboard, as the walnut and the cherry do have a slight colour to them. Okay, this has been on for a while now. What I've done is I've just wiped a little bit more oil on, and I'm using a piece of very fine, I think this is 1000 grit wet and dry paper used for in the car industry, and basically I'm just rubbing that oil coat in. There are several ways of doing it. Now some people use a cotton wool pad, and you just put that in the middle, and this absorbs the varnish. And this is how that's one way. The pads aren't very big; they're tiny little things, really. Another way is to use a rubber, a natural rubber. This is an eraser, sorry, a razor, rubber eraser, and it's just been cut sort of rounded sort of shape. Now some people have used this with quite success. If you double over the cloth, that allows some absorbency of the material. And again, you're creating a small little rubber, small hard surface that we can rub on the instrument with varnish. Now this is our varnish we made a few days ago. As you can see, the purple colour's gone and all the pieces of shellac are dissolved. And this is just perfect now. This is ready for use. I normally use a pipette to take some out, but I seem to have lost mine, so I'm just going to pour a small amount, tiny little amount, into a little tray, into this little lid. And the first coat is just probably going to soak right through. And this dries very quickly. Within a few minutes this will just disappear. It's already dried. Okay, again we're just building up a layer of varnish on this at the moment, a very thin layer. Okay, now we can leave that for a while and then come back and then add another coat in about an hour. As I say, at the moment, the first initial coats, they're just soaking straight through. In between doing your finishing, take the pads or the rubbers and put them inside a jar, and then seal the jar so it's airtight. Now if you do that, then they're not going to dry out and get all hard. Another little tip, I put some paper cloth inside the instrument, just a piece of, just like a tiny little piece, a quarter. This just stops the varnish from going inside and spoiling the label, or splattering on the inside as you go. Now, even at this stage, after, I don't know, 6 coats or more, it could be left. You could leave the instrument as it is, sort of a semi-matte finish. It's a shellac based finish. If you want to take it further and push it to a more shiny finish, then we need to. There's several more stages to go. We're going to have to keep going to build up the coat, and then we're going to have to leave it for a while, probably for a month or so, before we cut it back a bit. So it depends how polished we want to make it. Today we're going to be looking at the headstock. We're going to be fitting the pegs and finishing the nut. This is just a piece of bone I bought from a pet shop. So it's already been boiled and cleaned out and sterilised. So I've sliced the piece off, and now I'm going to cut this to size and then sand this down. I've sanded it close to the right thickness, but we'll fine tune it when we put it on the instrument. Just a fraction, about half a millimetre over there, half a millimetre over there. Now I'm trying my best to keep the square at this point, but slightly beveled on that side. Once I've got it in, then I'm going to bevel it again backwards towards the headstock. Use our fine pencil to mark on exactly what needs to come off. We don't want to take too much off. With the neck, I've done this at just under 25 millimeters wide, just under 1 inch wide. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to slightly reduce the size from 9 millimeters, probably to around about 8, maybe 8.1, but just fractionally over 8. That's all within playability. It's just a small scratch line on each side and the centre one. And this is just to start the initial cut. It's just something I can rest on that knife cut, and it's just going to start the initial mark for me. Now it's a more rounded bottom one. It's got a nice rounded bottom. It's an oval but rounded at the bottom, and I use this to start the slot. Now I'm not. So I rested it again in the space I just made, and at this stage I'm really just sort of deepening the slots. I'm nowhere near the level that I need to be yet, so I don't have to worry. Okay, now I've got the string positions marked on. What I'm actually going to do now, what I normally do now is actually use, these are actual fret files, and I use these to deepen the slot. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to file the slot at an angle so that the string is guided towards the back. What we're going to use, once we've got this on now, we'll actually take bone from the bottom. When we come to actually size this for the strings, we'll actually take off, rather than taking off from the top, we'll take off from the bottom. But we'll leave this in at the moment until we're at the stringing stage. Now I do have a template that I use, but this is only a general guide. I do sort of adjust the fit on every one to make sure it fits the headstock, mainly because I do vary the width of the fingerboard. So this is only my rough guide. We just eyeball it to make sure that it's clear of the sides. So it's the final machine peg, which is on the smallest piece of wood. It's basically almost central. I've almost got it central. So there's wood on either side, so the hole will be supported. So you're not weakening the headstock by having a hole too near the edge. Say for example you've got a soft cedar or a soft mahogany, then you can make the hole midway, like this is like 9.76 millimeters. So you would make the hole midway, and then that would be a nice push fit. The wood I'm using, I think, is quite hard, so it's not like to dent. So I would go for almost, I think it's almost a metric, almost looking at 10 millimeters really. So I place the point on the place I want to drill. Now, holding it in position, I then clamp up either side. Okay, I'm then able to drill. Okay, and then we repeat the same for the other holes. Okay, all we need to do now is pull out the wedges. Remove the masking tape that protected our head. Now, if we were fitting these type with the screw holes, you need to mark on where the head is going. It needs to be in the same line, so each one, it's in line there. So if you mark on where it needs to go, and if you use a bradawl or an awl to make a hole, to mark for the hole, you need to then, you can either pre-drill the hole with a millimeter or 1/2 millimeter bit for the screw, or alternatively you could use another steel screw to make the initial hole and then screw it in. Now the next, because I'm using a different make, the make I'm using has the 2 pins, so the way I do this one, and the way I'm going to do these are Wilkinson brand, the way I'm going to do is put them on first, and then I'm going to put them on first, and then what I will do, I will loosely tighten up the retaining nuts. This is just the first fit. I'll make sure these are around the right way. And when you've decided that you've got it and that's the position you want, then you can tighten up a little bit more. And if you see from the side, you can see where the pins will be going into the wood. If we tighten this up a little bit more, it will press and leave a mark. And those marks are the ones we're going to use to enlarge. Okay, that's all fitted, and we just need to tighten up, so we just need to make sure we put the washers on the right way round. The one side they're slightly more rounded. Okay, so there we are. It's finished, the nut is ready. Now what we need to do is to fit the tailpiece. Now I supply tailpieces ready-made, a metal tail pin from it's actually a guitar type of tail pin. But basically we're going to mark on the central position and we are going to fix this so that the strings are drawn down over the edge without touching the soundboard to the end of the tailpiece. We are going to be putting a bit of cork just over the end there, just to make sure that the string doesn't cut into the soundboard at all. Now you need to double check the central point where you're going to fix the tailpin to, and you can do this by putting a board or a ruler against the fingerboard, and you need to make a pencil mark just very lightly on the soundboard. You don't want to, it's just for your own reference. And this is just to make sure, because these things can sometimes be just very slightly off center. So we're just making a mark just to make sure. This can be rubbed off. And then we can see how this matches up. If you look here, now if we lay our tailpiece over this, you can see now that the tailpiece should be in the direct center, should be the middle string should be in the direct center between those two lines. Now you might have to make some sort of slight adjustment if you want to keep the strings in center. But if you followed all the stages so far, you should find the neck is quite straight off the mold. Okay, so I'm using that pencil line, and I'm using my square. I might want to use the top edge, I think, probably to work down from. So we just make sure that we can make a scratch line that is going to be dead center. Okay, so we use this to just scratch the line down. Now we just double check that is in the center. When we've done that, we need to work out where we're going to position our tailpiece. Now, if you've made your own tailpiece, it will be slightly different position, so I'm not going to give you exact measurements here. But the principle, what we want to do is we want to make sure that these holes are above the level of the body. Okay, so when you're happy that the tailpiece is just, the holes are just slightly above the soundboard by about 1 millimeter, then you can mark the position on with your bradawl. Now here it might be worth having a square bradawl actually to make a proper hole. Okay, so we've just made a mark. You can just about see that hole there. Now the hole jewel in the end block of the Stick Dulcimer depends on the size of screw that you have. The ones I supply, this is like a guitar size one. I also supply a mandolin one. Now they each have different size screws, and so first of all you need to look at the screw that you're using, which is the one which matches your tailpin. It's very important that the hole you make is neither too large or too small. You want it to be, if I just draw it, the screw is made up of two parts. There's the central section of the screw, and then there is the actual thread itself, which wraps around like this. Now you want to make the hole in your Stick Dulcimer the same size as this. You've got the cherry, and then you've got the tail block, and it's into this tail block that the instrument will be held in place. If you make it too loose, it won't be secure enough. You don't want it over tight because you want to put pressure on that end block at all. So if you measure and then do a few tests, maybe that might be the best way of doing it. In this example, just reset my caliper. This example looks like 1.8. It's quite hard to measure in the gaps really. And we know that that's nearly 3 millimeters. But, I know a 3 millimeter hole in this one would just be too loose. So we're going to have to make it somewhere between 1.9 and... So what I'll do is I'll do a test hole first with a 1.9 millimeter bit and see how that feels, and then I'll progress up to a 2. First of all, I use the self-adhesive cork strip and I place that in place. and then I held the tailpiece in the end, clamped the instrument into a vice upside down, so that with 2 pieces of cork supporting the neck and the fingerboard, so that it was wedged in position, not too tight, just enough to hold it. And then what I did was I held the tailpiece in position, and then I took my cordless electric drill with a 2mm bit, and I held it upright, continued to drill all the way very carefully until I'd gone through, keeping the drill 90 degrees, so it wasn't going forwards, going backwards, it was going straight down. I then used my Phillips screwdriver to screw on the tailpiece, and I screwed it until it was almost too tight, so I could always turn it a little bit more, but it was tight enough so that the tailpiece was buttock up against the sides of the instrument. The bridge can be made of any piece of maple or other wood that you can get hold of. It's not terribly critical, although we want to keep it light really. In this example, this is an old one I made about 8 or 9 years ago. This one was a maple body, and I've sawn into it a little groove, and I put a piece of ebony or rosewood into it. Do this now, but we'll play a bit more once we'll cut out some examples, and then when we put the strings on later, we will see which one works, and then we'll make a finished bridge from that. Okay, so I've just drawn on 3 different sizes of bridge, and I'm just going to bandsaw these. What I suggest you do is use the thickest saw you have. Some sort of tenon saw would be ideal. It has a quite thick blade, and then you'll need to plane a piece of rosewood or ebony to the right size, and then insert and glue that in, and then sand to finish afterwards. Hard work has now brought us to this stage, and we're ready to look at putting the strings on. The strings I'm using are these ones. I've got the Dario guitar strings. This is a 10 hundredths of an inch, 14s, and for the bass string, the D string, I've got these acoustic bronze. I've got these phosphor bronze 023 strings. Okay, we'll start with the bass string. And the way the tailpiece works is that you insert the string through from behind, and you carefully feed through. Now the bass string is tied to this one here. We're just going to go through once and then twice again. Now this string is round. We turn the peg so that it moves clockwise. Okay. And this time we'll be turning the string the other way, which is counterclockwise. Again, we feed the string through, put it tight, and then reinsert again. It's just a quick way of doing it. It's best to start off a little bit high and then whittle it down as you go. To mark this one out, what we do is we mark on the central place a little nick. This is just for the string to rest on. It's not natural. It's not so vital. It just needs to be in the centre. And then we measure 8mm either side. Again, just a little nick for the string to rest on. And the same again. And we can always adjust these later if we want to widen it or shorten it. This is just the first initial stage. I mean, I do suspect this is slightly too high. We can widen those either with... Okay, so here we are. This is the Stick Dulcimer completed. I'm just going to give you a short example. Say thank you very much to everyone who's put comments and encouraged me to complete this series. I know it's taken a while. I promised originally back in 2005, I think, to get the plans for this going, and it took me a year to get that, and then it's taken me 2 years to get the videos going, and it's taken me 2 years to complete the actual video series. So I thank you very much to everyone who's helped and given me sort of ask questions and help me sort of know what I need to show you. Thanks very much for watching.